With these new watch releases, doesn't it kind of feel like that old movie Groundhog Day where the guy wakes up and every day is kind of the same? That's what it feels like today with Omega and Swatch, with the MoonSwatch releasing the Moonshine Gold. This is a watch that is going to be released in a handful of Swatch stores today, and the only difference that we have is one subtle difference, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But before we do that, guys, I do want to share with you that we just got in about 50 new watches at Del Rey Watch, delreywatch.com, where we buy, sell, and trade. We have GP Laureatos, we have Vacheron Overseas, we have a bunch of new Grand Seikos. We have so many cool things that we've been working around the clock to try to deliver, some great values on some watches for our fellow watch collectors. And that's what we've always tried doing since day one. So make sure to check out the latest drop if you're in the market for a watch. And of course, if you need to sell a watch, we're here for you. So back to the news. Omega Swatch, there's a new MoonSwatch, and it's the same thing over again. It feels like it was just yesterday that I was making the video where I talked about how there were lines and people were waiting and they were going to flip them on the internet and what I think what would happen. Well, the same thing is happening again. There's a new MoonSwatch with a gold second chronograph hand, and this gold is Omega calls it Moonshine Gold, but essentially it's the scrap gold that Omega would probably use for their cases and other things. Maybe the platings of certain things. Well, basically, they just coated or plated, the second's chronograph hand with this, and they took the Mission to the Moon, Omega MoonSwatch variant, and they put it on this, and then they are only going to be selling it they're currently selling it actually at the time of the shooting, in 5 different cities, the cities of London, Milan, Tokyo, and Zurich. Omega says that, Omega Swatch, really, Swatch Group, who owns both Omega and Swatch, they say, there's a lot of reasoning behind this because these cities have a long history of gold. It's kind of, this rhetoric that you see sometimes in marketing of, oh yeah, here's some reasons, but is it those reasons? It's kind of like, when Grand Seiko will sometimes say, oh, this dial is supposed to be this stream in this village and this and that. And it's like, well, it's a blue dial. It's got a nice pattern. It's kind of a romantic little story there that you've made up. But let's be honest about it. It's kind of just, someone in an office somewhere behind a keyboard, or maybe even working from home, just kind of crafted this narrative and it works. We should be honest about that. But that's what's happening here. People are lining up and you have all the watch blogs saying, oh, this is going to be a big knockout hit, this and that. And I have some friends who are in some different, collectors chat groups. I don't contribute too much to those chat groups any longer, but think like the Red Bar chat groups and things like that. And apparently, there's a lot of negative buzz once again. Oh, I can't believe Omega and Swatch would do this. They're watering down the brand, this and that. Basically the exact same thing. And it's just shocking to me that, the same people a year later, something along those lines, are engaging in the same conversations of, well, Omega and Swatch, they're watering their brand down. They only replace the seconds hand. And I think if we just look at the bigger picture here, it's kind of an okay product, right? It's okay. It's not going to be a several $1,000 watch. The retail is like $260 or the equivalent, depending where you are in the world. They've become more readily available. You can buy a MoonSwatch. So for them to put, a subtle change and change the hand and make it kind of interesting and try to, get someone or captivate newer collectors, a little bit something different, I don't have a problem with that. And I don't think that we should, right? We're talking about a more affordable watch. And today, even on the wrist, I'm wearing a Casio G-Shock, my go-to plastic quartz-driven watch. These watches have purposes. They may not be for the person that's looking for a high-end independent collection, right? Like the FP Journes, the Keri Voutilainens. It may not be someone that wants a steel, integrated bracelet sports watch like a Patek Philippe Nautilus, like a Girard-Perregaux Laureato, like an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. This is a different watch, totally different type altogether. And I get it, some people maybe feel that, they saved up and they bought an Omega Speedmaster Professional, and then Omega comes out with a quartz variant. It's just not the same. It's not the same watch. And this is just something that brands will probably have to do to set themselves apart and to captivate collectors into the future. There are so many micro brands and so many brands, and they're also competitive. And the things collectors seem to want, and I know because I work with them all the time, especially at Del Rey Watch and listening to your comments here, many collectors kind of want the same things, whether or not there's there's little pockets of very vocal people that say, For example, Omega copied Rolex with their colorful dials. Well, it must work because it must sell because all the brands across the board have come out with colorful dials, right? All the brands across, even Zinn with the 556 colorful dial, the turquoise, the yellow, the orange, all of that, same kind of colorways as the Rolex OP, as the Omega Aquaterra. It sold out pretty quickly. So even in the tool watch segment, a very critical group of collectors, they still are buying the same types of things and qualities that the other brands are selling, the integrated sports watches, it's selling. And so, regardless of what some people, some very vocal people say about this is wrong, they should do something more and better, I think, once again, I've talked about this in the past, but the expectation of there to be, kind of just meeting everyone's expectations is just unrealistic, especially from a large brand that is trying to build and scale and grow out and bring in more collectors to the hobby. They have to keep growing, otherwise they're shrinking, and they have large marketing budgets, so they need to be relying on something here to keep moving into the forward and being a going concern. So that's kind of my take on this, and I really do want to kind of stress this is, guys, this is like a hobby, I think, for most people. I mean, for me, it's also a career choice, which I love and enjoy, but it started as a hobby. And I'm seeing many people and collectors get into this kind of mindset where they're like mad. They are mad for some reason that Omega swapped a hand on a watch. It might not be this great grand gesture, or it might not be what they wanted, but it's kind of cool. It's interesting, right? You go buy a car, well, maybe one model has a different set of wheels on it or a different package. Okay, they're not necessarily saying, hey, this car is going to change the world, and either is Swatch or Omega necessarily with the variants of watches. There's some fluff in there, and that's marketing. If there's marketing people out there, feel free to chime in, and maybe it's more, I think if there is some kind of, criticisms for this particular watch and series, maybe it should be directed at the marketing teams, at just kind of doing things that are not necessarily misleading, but just kind of irrelevant maybe. For example, this watch comes with a certificate that says that the hand was actually produced during, the day in February where there was a full moon. This is supposed to be some kind of full moon, limited production or special variant of the watch. And I personally don't really understand that. I don't know, maybe there are superstitious people out there that, think it's, good luck or something to have their watch hand produced under a full moon. But I just don't get that necessary aspect of it, especially considering it depends where in the world at a certain time did they see the full moon. Not, the full moon is not always visible everywhere on the earth, let alone at the same time of day in the same moment. So I don't get that at all. There's clearly a lot of marketing fluff, but that's watches, but even more so than watches, that's products, right? Companies need to sell their products. They'll change something different, put a spin on it, and if people like it, they'll buy it. But I don't think they're saying, hey, this is going to change the world. This is some kind of grand gesture. That's kind of what they did, with the recent release of the Omega Speedmaster Racing, and they kind of just changed a screw there and said that the watch was a little more accurate. I did a video about that just a handful of weeks ago. But this is a little bit different. Personally, I really like the watch. I don't have a MoonSwatch yet. I like the style of it. The second hand seems to have a little bit more contrast, a little bit something different than just the normal stock Mission to the Moon version of the watch. But once again, I think the point of this video really here, I know it sounds like I'm probably ranting at this point, but I see this across the board, and I think that if we together as collectors just put these kind of ambiguous high expectations on the brands, we're just going to be disappointed. It becomes negative when this could just be more about positivity, being excited to see what things come out with in the future. If it's not for us, well, everything's not going to be for us. We can't have everything. We can't have everything our way. And I think that's probably the way that, a collector that's kind of going down that path should look at it. That's the way I look at it. Just kind of pleasantly surprised when things come out. If it's not for me, no big deal. But in terms of, sharing the specs with you on things like that and some of the business practices and the way that the companies are moving, that's really my perspective and sharing it with you. But as a collector, if something's not for me, no big deal. There'll be something else in the future. And that's what's awesome about watches is, the brands have to come out with cool things in the future so that you buy more watches. So you never know what's going to come out tomorrow. But let me know, guys, what do you think about this in the comments below? Do any of you actually wear MoonSwatch frequently, or what do you think about this particular release? I'd love to see it in the comments below. Once again, please do not forget to check out delraywatch.com. You can find me on Instagram, the real John P. And we'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P.